Maybe nothing is wrong. The kids can handle their own problems. Work doesn't fall apart without you. Nobody's calling because something broke, somebody forgot, or somebody needs you to figure out what happens next. This is supposed to be the good part. So why can it feel strangely bad? Because there's a difference between having nothing you need to do and feeling like nobody needs what you can do. And if being useful has spent years giving you a reliable answer to the question, where do I matter here? Then losing the problems can feel like losing part of the answer. That's the strange contradiction. You can genuinely want fewer responsibilities. You can be tired of being the one who remembers, fixes, figures out, anticipates, covers the gap, or knows who to call. And then the gap disappears. And instead of thinking, finally, part of you thinks, okay, now what? Because being needed gives you something that being merely busy doesn't. Clarity. When somebody comes to you with a problem, your role is obvious. There's a before. Something isn't working. There's a job, you know what to do, and there's an after. Now it works. You don't have to spend much time wondering whether you contributed something. The evidence is sitting right in front of you. Something needed doing. You did it. That can be deeply satisfying. And there's nothing unhealthy about that by itself. Being competent feels good. Helping people can feel good. Knowing that someone trusts your judgment can feel good. The problem is that over enough years, a role can become so familiar that you stop experiencing it as a role. It just feels like you. You're the person who handles it, not necessarily the person fixing the sink. Handling it can mean knowing how to calm down a chaotic meeting, knowing what to do when plans collapse, catching the detail everybody else missed, helping a friend think clearly, keeping a project moving, being the person people call because you've seen this before. And for some Gen X adults, that identity may feel especially familiar. Not because an entire generation has one personality. It doesn't. But many people can recognize the experience of becoming capable without making a ceremony out of it. You learn something because it needs learning. You solve something because nobody else is going to solve it right now. Eventually, competence stops feeling like an accomplishment. It feels like the minimum. And that creates an interesting asymmetry. When you're needed, you may barely notice the message you're receiving. But the message is there. You know something. You can do something. Your presence changes the outcome. You matter here. Nobody has to say those words. The situation says them for you. And that's where usefulness can quietly become more than usefulness. It can become feedback. Think about how unusually clear that feedback is. A lot of the things we say give life meaning are ambiguous. Did that conversation matter? Does anyone notice the experience I bring into the room? Am I still important to people who no longer depend on me? Those questions don't always give immediate answers. Problems do. A problem can look you straight in the face and say, I need something you have. That's an incredibly clean signal. And then something happens that should be entirely good. People get more capable. Your children, if you have them, need less intervention. A coworker you train doesn't need to ask you every time. A partner takes care of something without checking first. A friend gets through a difficult stretch and stops calling every night. A system you helped build actually works without constant supervision. This is success. In many cases, this was the goal. You spent years helping things become more stable, more independent, less dependent on you. And then they do. That's when the contradiction becomes visible. The rational part says, good. But another part has lost a source of information. If nobody needs you to step in, where does that familiar evidence of value come from now? This doesn't mean you want people to fail. It doesn't mean you secretly want your adult children to be helpless, or your coworkers to be incompetent. And it certainly doesn't mean every Gen Xer feels this way. It means something much simpler. We don't always miss the burden when a role disappears. Sometimes we miss what the burden used to prove. That's a very different thing. Because if you think you miss being busy, the obvious solution is to become busy again. Find another project. Take over something that didn't need taking over. Solve a problem before anyone asked. Become indispensable somewhere new. And for a while, that may work. The familiar signal comes back. Something needed you. You handled it. Everything feels organized again. But notice what happened. The problem wasn't necessarily that you had too much empty time. The problem was that empty time wasn't answering the question your responsibilities used to answer automatically. What am I for here? That's why just relax can completely miss the point. Relaxation solves overload. It doesn't automatically solve a loss of role. You can have a free afternoon and still feel perfectly secure in yourself. Or you can have a free afternoon that feels vaguely wrong because there's nothing in it confirming that you're useful. Same afternoon, completely different experience. And this is where being good at carrying responsibility can create a strange problem later. The better you become at being useful, the easier it is for usefulness to become invisible. Nobody thinks every morning, "Today I will derive my sense of value from being competent." You just keep doing what works. People rely on you. You get things done. Life rewards the pattern. And because the pattern is productive, there may never be an obvious reason to question it. Until the environment changes, then the skill is still there. The experience is still there. The judgment is still there. But there are fewer situations demanding it. And suddenly the absence of demand can be mistaken for the absence of value. Those are not the same thing, but they can feel remarkably similar. Imagine you've spent years being the person everyone calls when something goes sideways. Then one day, nobody calls. There are at least two ways to interpret that silence. One is, they don't need me anymore, therefore I don't matter as much. But there's another possibility. Maybe some of what you built worked. Maybe some of what you taught stuck. Maybe the people around you became more capable partly because you were useful when usefulness was required. In that interpretation, being needed less isn't evidence that your contribution disappeared. It can sometimes be evidence that the contribution already happened. And even that doesn't completely solve the problem, because there's a deeper question waiting underneath it. If nobody has an urgent use for what you can do today, does it still count? That's where usefulness and value have to separate. Being needed is powerful because it makes value visible. But visible value and value itself aren't identical. A fire extinguisher looks incredibly important when there's a fire. Its importance didn't begin when the smoke appeared. And people are obviously more complicated than objects, but the distinction matters. Demand is evidence that something is needed right now. It isn't a complete measurement of what something is worth. That means the uncomfortable "now what" moment may not actually be asking you to find another emergency. It may be asking for a broader definition of where value comes from. One that can include competence without requiring constant crisis, contribution without indispensability, connection without dependency, experience that doesn't need to be summoned by a problem before it counts. And that doesn't require rejecting the part of you that likes being useful. There's no reason to turn competence into the villain. Maybe you really are the person who can handle things. Good. Keep that. The shift is smaller than becoming somebody else. It's recognizing that "people need me" has been doing two jobs. It described a situation, but it may also have been answering a question about you. And situations change. People become independent. Jobs change. Families reorganize. Problems get solved. Eventually, if your value requires someone else's need to make itself visible, peaceful periods can start feeling strangely empty. Not because peace is the problem, because the old measuring system has nothing to measure. So when nobody needs you and that uncomfortable feeling appears, maybe the question isn't, "How do I make myself necessary again?" Maybe it's, "What still feels meaningful when nobody is asking me to prove that I'm useful?" Because being needed can be a wonderful feeling. It tells you that you have something worth giving. But perhaps one of the harder transitions is realizing that the second part can remain true, even when the first part goes quiet. Nobody needing you right now doesn't mean there's nothing left in you that's needed, and it definitely doesn't mean there's nothing left in you that matters. Sometimes it simply means that for once nothing is on fire, and learning what you are when you don't have to put out the fire may be the real now what.